Good Thursday morning to you. I want to take today and tomorrow to talk about Elisha. We really don't give enough time to the stories of the prophets, and to better understand the prophets, we better understand God, because it is the voice of God that the prophets come to bear for us in the world. And so as we look at 2 Kings, there are 2 days I want to take on Elisha, because today I want to focus on something that is particularly unique about the prophets. And then tomorrow I just want to summarize the work that Elisha did and the interactions he had with the leaders of this world. And so today I want to talk about widows. I want to talk about women. As we look at prophets are often most heard by those who are marginalized and disregarded. And unfortunately, throughout the Old Testament, that often is women. In 2 Kings, we have 2 great stories of women who have come to Elisha, women who come to him out of desperation or out of hospitality, and Elijah blesses them in a unique and profound way. The first occurrence happens in 2 Kings, the 4th chapter. There is a widow. So a woman's husband dies and leaves her with 2 sons. This should actually sustain her life. This should be a good thing for her. But unfortunately, her husband has debts. And today we might even call those bad debts, because she's unaware of them. Maybe there was a little bit of a facade of what her life was like. And then suddenly her husband dies, and the debt collectors come and they ask for the children, because unfortunately throughout the narrative of the Old Testament and into the New Testament, we know this specifically with King Herod. Herod loved to collect children to pay taxes, and especially young boys. And so we have this understanding, this normalcy in the context, which is always good and important to remember, that just because it's normal in the context does not mean it's normal and blessed by God. It's simply the result of a human broken world. We can look at our world and know the hardships and the struggles that exist in this world are not caused by or blessed by God. They are a product of a sinful, broken world. This is the case in 2 Kings 4. The widow has now realized that her husband had debts, and the debt collectors come to collect their debts by trying to get her 2 children as slaves. So she comes to Elisha, and Elisha says in verse 2 of chapter 4, "What shall I do for you?" I love that question. Jesus asks that. We had this a couple weeks ago in the gospel text with Bartimaeus, and this is the question of the faithful, right? What should I do for you? When someone comes to you with a need, the faithful response is, "What can I do for you?" That's just not a hospitality. That is a hospitality that comes from what God is instilling within us. So Elisha has this woman come to her, and he says, "What can I do for you?" And she says, "I have nothing in my house except for a jar of oil. I want to pay these debts because I don't want these people to take my children, and so help me." Right? She's trying to figure out what this looks like. Now, if you read chapter 4, what you'll notice is she really can't concept what help looks like. I always take a moment to pause in this, because there's a lot of times when I ask God for help, but I've got a pretty detailed plan of what God should do to help me. That is not the case in the faithful response. The faithful response is simply to come before God and ask for help, not detailing how the help should come or from whom the help should come, but just that there is faith that the help will come. And so she comes to Elisha, and Elisha says, "What will I do for you?" And she says, "I have these debts, and I have nothing in the house but a small jar of oil." When you come before God, you give the small resources that you have, and you let God do the rest. And so Elisha says, "Gather all the jars and containers you can find. Get the Tupperware from the neighbors. Fill your home with empty vessels. Shut the door. Do not let any of the vessels have anything in it. And start pouring oil from the small oil jar that you have." And so she does as she's told. She gets all of the vessels. She shuts the door. And she starts filling these vessels with a small jar of oil, the only possession that she had. And of course, the miracle happens, and she fills more than 70 vessels. When all of the vessels in the home have been filled, Elisha comes and he says, "Is there anything else to fill?" And she says, "I have no other vessels." And then the oil stops. Because God's abundance has a purpose. It's not just for us to be gluttonous. It has a purpose. And so the oil stops. And she sells those jars of oil, and she pays her debts, and she keeps her children. There's something beautiful in Elijah and how he speaks to the widows and to the orphans, to the marginalized, and to those who are disregarded from common society. Now there's another interaction with a woman, and this time it is a woman who actually has a husband. She is a woman who has never had children. And every time Elisha travels through the neighborhood, through the village, he happens to come and she shows him great hospitality. So there's kind of something neat about this story. And if you follow along in chapter 4, it's toward verse 8 on. So it's the widow's oil is just the first 7 verses, and the rest of it is the Shunammite woman. And so Elisha would travel through. She'd show him hospitality. One day she says to her husband, we have this upper space. Let's build walls. Let's create a bed. Let's essentially make a resting place, because I know that this is a man of God. Now, again, it's always fascinating to me, because those who aren't quite sure of the Almighty, those who aren't raised in this faith, those who maybe, again, are on the fringe, they are the ones who seem to have a better instinct of who is God and who are God's prophets in the world. And so this woman has her husband build walls, put a bed, and creates a space for Elisha. So as Elisha comes through, she not only offers him hospitality of food, but she says, "Come, rest your head, lay, and that you may sleep." So Elisha has an interaction with her. In verse 13, this is what he says. "Say to her, since you have taken all the trouble for us, what may be done for you?" Again, there's that echoing of Jesus, right? What may I do for you? "Would you have a word spoken on your behalf to the king or the commander of the army?" She answered, "I live among my own people." So she's not in any kind of taxation. She's not in any kind of oppression. And then he says, he pushes a little bit further. "What then may be done for you?" Well, she has no son. Elisha's assistant, Gehazi, says she has no son. And Elisha knows exactly the way to bless her. So he calls her, and when he called her, he stood at the door. And Elisha says, "At this season and due time, you shall embrace a son." And she says, "No." She says, "No, my Lord, O man of God, do not deceive your servant." And the woman conceived and bore a son. So she was showing great hospitality. She knew that this was a man of God, but she didn't know the fullness of what that meant. And when he said that he would bless her in a way, or that she would be blessed in a way of profound value, she says, "Wait a minute. I don't know if I believe that much. I don't know if I can go that far." And in due time, we read, she conceives and bears a son. Now, when the child grows old, the child is with his father, and suddenly has a headache, has a pain in his head, and he falls ill. And his father brings him back to the home, and the father lays the child on his mother's lap, and the child dies. The most horrible thing a parent could experience, the helplessness and just the longing that exists in this moment. And so she calls her husband, says, "I want a servant. I want a camel, or I want a donkey, I want a camel, I want a horse, I want something. I want to go to Elisha." And so the husband says, "What does it matter? What does it matter what day it is? What does it matter? This is what happened." So the mother puts the child in Elisha's room, this room that she prepared for Elisha. She gets on and she rides to where the prophet is, where Elisha is at Mount Carmel. And she begs of him. Now, of course, Gehazi, the assistant, is kind of wanting her to go away, kind of wanting to dismiss her. And Elijah says no. And so Elijah sends Gehazi to the house first. He can do nothing. He puts the mantle over the child's face, sees that the child is not breathing. So then Elisha himself comes in and lays on the child, prostrates on the child, hand to hand, face to face, eyes to eyes, and the child wakes up and lives. You would think that this is the end of the story. She takes the child, she comes to Elisha's feet, and she bows at him. Now, Elisha continues to bless her, even though, there's this one interaction. There's famine in the land, and so he tells her, go away, take everything in your house, go away, go to a land where there's going to be food because there's going to be great famine. And you have to skip ahead here. You have to skip ahead until about chapter 8. The Shunammite woman then returns back, but because she's been away, all of her lands, all her property has been given away. It's been divided away from her. And she comes before the king, and she says, I need this help. I need this assistance. And the king, in the land of the Philistines, the king says to the servant of God, tell me the great things that Elisha has done. And lo and behold, the Shunammite woman comes in and says, look, let me tell you. Don't listen to Elisha's right-hand man. Let me tell you. He not only gave me a son, but he raised my son from the dead. And because she bears witness to what God is doing, the king restores everything to her that she had before the land had gone into famine, before she left her space. So as we think about can you relate, there's two stories of two women that this world would have disregarded, that this world wouldn't have cared about, that this world would have allowed for it to do what was contextually and culturally acceptable, strip them of any dignity, anything of value in their life. And yet, the prophet of God, God's very voice in this world, comes and speaks a word of value into each of their life. As we think about these stories, while we may not relate, and I really hope that we have moved into an understanding in this world where we do not strip people of their dignity and values, although sadly that still happens, right? But I really do hope that no matter how marginalized you might feel, no matter how insignificant you feel like the world looks at you and treats you, I hope that what you hear is that God has a word for you. There is no one outside of God's reign. There is no one outside of God's kingdom that God doesn't love and want to care for and tend to. And sometimes, and really more often than we might realize, it is the marginalized. It is the ones who do not know the full understanding of God, who speak the loudest word before God, who witness to the profound acts of God in their life. So today's Thursday. As you think about Elijah, as you think about these two women, that he literally changed their life, how is God changing your life? How is God speaking into your wonder and even your doubt? How is God coming before you, asking you, what would you like me to do for you? For the sake of showing that he is God and that we are his people. What would you have me do for you is the question God asks of us, not for the sake of making things according to our will, but showing that his will is always done. And that his will is, his purpose is to bring us joy, to remind us that we are part of his kingdom. We're not separate from it. We don't ever lose value in it. It's kind of a beautiful word if you think about this Thursday and how you end the week and how you look in the mirror and see value in yourself. Hopefully what you see is God seeing more value in you than you probably give yourself and probably the world gives you. But that also means that God has a purpose for you as well. And you have the opportunity to proclaim the great works that God has done in your life and in the world around you. Have a great day.